All right, good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Roach, and welcome to Forest Her, our Managing for Wildlife series. It's 1 o'clock, and we're going to go ahead and get started on time. That way we can end on time today. So once again, welcome. Welcome to the Managing for Wildlife workshop number 4. This is the 4th and final series or meetings in this Managing for Wildlife series. Of course, this was originally supposed to be a day-long workshop that we were hosting throughout all 3 of our regions across North Carolina. But due to COVID, as a lot of things have changed, so has this. So we were able to take these presentations, break them up into a series of 4 meetings. So we are very glad to be able to still come and talk with you today, maybe in your home, or if you're in your workplace or your individual office. That's great. We are glad to have you, and we are glad that you were able to take a few minutes out of your day to talk with us. So today we've got great presentations on board. We've got Falyn Owens and Becky Skiba, who are going to talk about wildlife interactions and wildlife identification skills. So this is, we've got a great agenda before us. If you're new to Forest Her, welcome. If you're returning, that's awesome. We're glad to have you back. If you want to go ahead and type in the chat box what county or where you're joining us today, we love to try to communicate. It just makes it very hard through virtual meetings such as this. So please feel free, type in the chat where you're from. We'd love to hear about it. If you don't know what I mean by the chat box, then Laurel Case with NC State Extension is going to talk with us for just a few minutes about how to migrate through this virtual meeting. So Laurel?
Thanks, Jennifer. So I think a few of you or a lot of you have joined us before, and I think a lot of us are familiar with Zoom at this point, but just a couple things for those who may not be. This is a webinar, so your audio and video are off and you cannot turn them on, but you can communicate with us through that chat box that Jennifer mentioned, and I see a lot of you using. You can use that chat box to answer any questions that presenters ask you that don't have a poll associated. You can use that chat box to ask questions about technology issues, if, for example, you can't hear or see the screen or something like that. For questions for the presenters, we ask that you use the Q&A box, which should be to the left of your chat box. In that Q&A box, you can type questions, and you can also upvote questions that other people have asked. So that helps us know if there's a lot of folks who really want a question answered, we make sure to get to that one. Closed captioning is available for this webinar. You should see on your Zoom menu at the bottom of your screen, depending on how you have your Zoom set up, a button that says closed caption. If you click that and show subtitle, that will show live closed captions for you. We will have an evaluation at the end of this webinar. You will be sent to that automatically when you X out of the Zoom window, and we'll also put that into the chat box at the end. And finally, this webinar is being recorded. As Jennifer mentioned, it will be available on our YouTube channel in a couple of days after the webinar. And so I think that's it for me. Jennifer, if I forgot anything, then please feel free to fill it in, but have a great webinar, everyone. We're so happy you've joined us today.
That is great. Thank you, Laurel. We're all definitely getting used to a lot of virtual meetings. So it looks like we have a lot of folks joining us today. We've got 108 people on the screen today from Surrey County, Chatham County, McDowell County, Buncombe County, Gastonia, Hillsborough, Raleigh. Let's see, haven't seen too many folks from the coast yet. Greensboro, Nash County. We've got folks from Chester, South Carolina, and Virginia. So all welcome. That is great to see so many faces today, and we are glad you chose to join us. So here at Forest Her, well, I guess first of all, my name is Jennifer Roach. I will be your moderator today. I am a forester with the North Carolina Forest Service, and I'm glad to be moving us through this meeting today. Here at Forest Her, we love to ask a lot of questions. We love to know a little bit more about the folks that are joining us. We want to know what you're interested in. We want to know if you have any questions or concerns, and just try to create a community of women across the state. And that's just hard to do virtually. So we do like to ask a lot of questions. So we appreciate you putting up with our antics today. So the first one we have is a poll question. So Laurel, if you could put that first poll question up. So the first question is this your first Forest Her event? If you could just quickly choose yes or no, that will help us get a little bit of information on who's out there today. Awesome. All right. Well, 65% of you are returning. So that is awesome to see. We are glad to know that we are providing information that is helpful to you, that you enjoy hearing about and want to learn more about. So thank you so much for returning. If you are new to these events, we love to hear from you. We want to know how we can improve things, do better, what you're interested in. And we really want to try and share information and getting more women talking and looking at their environment and walking their land and learning about these things. So great. Thank you so much. Our next poll question, Laurel, if you'll put up the second poll question. In what region are you managing land? Are you in the coastal plain, the Piedmont, or the mountains? The reason why we want to know this is, like I said before, originally these meetings were scheduled where we had one meeting in each of the regions across North Carolina. And now that we're not able to do that, we still want to know, who are we doing a good job reaching out to and giving this information to? And where do we need to maybe start getting some more folks out there? All right, so overwhelmingly, we have 71% of you are from the Piedmont. So that is great. The Piedmont has definitely been representing. But we also have a lot of folks from the coastal plain and from the mountains. So thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for answering those questions. All right. Well, without further ado, as I said, we have two great speakers before us. Our first speaker is Falyn Owens with the North Carolina Wildlife Commission, who is going to talk with us today about human and wildlife interactions. So Falyn, I will turn the screen over to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Jennifer. Hopefully I'm unmuted and you guys can see me if you want to look at my face while I'm presenting. I'm really excited to be here today and talk to you about something that takes up a lot of my time. I work for the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission, and human wildlife interactions are kind of my specialty. So I'm happy to share what information I can in honestly kind of a short period of time today. So before anything else, I do want to kind of establish what I mean by human wildlife interactions. And really, it's going to boil down to maybe a sighting of a wild animal that you weren't expecting, maybe a close encounter, and you get to define what close is in these types of situations. Unexpected, that's a really big one. This is something that you were not expecting. And it was noteworthy in some way that you remembered and you might want to talk to other people about. So a human wildlife interaction from my perspective is not, say, you going out deer hunting and seeing a deer, because you kind of signed up for that experience. The human wildlife interactions are the ones that you weren't expecting. And that's kind of what I'm going to talk about. Before I go too deeply into the types of human wildlife interactions, I kind of want to share this really important point about them, and that is that perception is everything. The same animal could be perceived by one person as dangerous or just inherently like a pest. And another person might view that animal as, a friend, something that they might want to, try to turn into a pet. And everything in between. So how we react emotionally and otherwise to human wildlife interactions that we experience has a whole lot to do with our preconceived notions of that animal and what its behavior means, and less to do with what the animal is actually doing. That there's this middle ground in between the two extremes of, really not liking the animal versus loving the animal, that as a wildlife biologist really is kind of the sweet spot. And that's where, people value wildlife as being a natural part of the environment, including near residences, and that they're inherently valuable. They're neither, pure good or pure evil. They're just kind of there. So that's kind of where I would prefer everybody land. Just to kind of illustrate how perception is everything, I've got a pop quiz for you guys to get you kind of stimulated and involved. I want you, to the best of your ability, describe what your reaction would be to seeing this outside your back door. So just give a second, and it might not be the full range of emotions that you would expect to experience, but pick the best one. And you'll notice that there's this nice manicured garden. Somebody spent a lot of time planting those flowers, and the deer are actively browsing on the flowers. That might be an important thing to note. All right, give it a couple more seconds. Let's see. Okay, so for the people who are seeing the recording, we've got 51% said that they would be happy. 25% said that they would be neutral, and 24% said that they would be annoyed. So, you know, different people are experiencing this interaction in different ways based off of sort of what's going on inside of them versus what the animal's doing. So here's another example. What would be your emotional reaction to seeing this right outside your back door? And this, for context, this coyote is like just kind of passing through, just wandering through the yard in the middle of the daytime. So how would you feel about that? All right. Oh, we got some really good variety here. 35% said that they would be happy. 28%, almost the same amount, said that they would feel neutral. Like, okay, it's just a coyote. 15% said that they would be annoyed, and 22% said that they would be scared. So we're really all across the board in terms of how people react to the same exact encounter. So this just sort of strikes home the idea that really how you react to a human-wildlife interaction has more to do with you than it does to do with the animal. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more. I want to start off by talking about these situations where you stumble upon an animal that you perceive it needs help in some way. You're empathizing with it. You perceive it to be hurt or orphaned, and it needs help. So we're going to talk a little bit about those types of human-wildlife interactions. Before I go into that, though, I'm going to mention this several times during my presentation. I want you guys to write down information on the right of the screen here for the NC Wildlife Helpline. This is an amazing resource for anybody in North Carolina if they want to learn more about human-wildlife interactions, especially if they've just experienced one. So it's kind of like a 411, so like an information hotline for human-wildlife interactions. It's run through the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission, and as a government-run sort of institution, it operates during normal business hours, so Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. So the phone number you can call, there's also the email, hwi@ncwildlife.org, and there's a whole web page that has lots of information about different types of interactions. If you call this number, you are actually going to be talking to a wildlife biologist. So these are actually the pictures on the screen. These are our 3 wildlife biologists who answer the helpline questions, and they are experienced with human-wildlife interactions. They have a diversity of experience, and they are there to help. So for just an important piece of information, this is not like a dispatch where you can call and they can like send somebody out to your house to handle the situation right away. It's more like a 411. So they will provide you the information that you need to make a good decision on how to respond to the interaction. But they are an excellent resource. Real quick, because COVID-19 has kind of thrown everything for a loop, I do want to warn you that for now and into the immediate future, these wildlife biologists are actually working out of their homes. So usually they'd be working in a call center environment where the phone's ringing and they can answer back to back. Right now, the way it's set up is that if you call that number, it's actually going to go straight to voicemail. But if you leave a voicemail, they will call you back. So keep in mind, if you call now or in the next several months until everything goes back to normal, you are going to go straight to voicemail. But if you want somebody to call you back, please leave a voicemail because they will call you back 100%. Okay, so where were we? We're going to talk about injured or orphaned or otherwise wildlife that you think might need assistance. I'm going to go run through some general tips. The first one is, if it can escape capture, leave it alone. If it doesn't run away, but appears healthy, probably you should leave it alone too. So being chased or captured by a human being is incredibly stressful for a wild animal. Even if you have the best of intentions, they don't know that. They think they're about to die. They think they're about to get eaten. So trying to capture an animal, even if you think it needs help, can actually cause a whole lot of undue stress. And for some species, it can actually be deadly. It can cause them to go into shock and die. Deer are an example of that. So here's an example on the screen. We've got a Canada goose who obviously has a wing injury, but its feet appear to be perfectly normal. Its legs are normal. And if I were to try to capture this goose to help it in some way, it's just going to run away, and it's going to go to the nearest body of water and try to get away from you. In a situation like that, this animal probably has had this injury for weeks, months, years. They can live for years with these types of injuries, and you trying to chase it down to help is really just going to do more harm than good. So again, if it can run away, probably the best thing to do is just leave it alone, and it's going to want you to do that. They don't want to be bothered by people. Here's another example, a three-legged deer. There are a lot of three-legged wild animals out there, especially larger animals like deer and bear. Most of those injuries have to do with being hit by cars. But as you can see, this doe is got healthy weight. You know, she looks pretty healthy. She's probably had that injury for who knows how many years. Case in point, here's a great photo of a three-legged doe with a fawn. And in my personal experience, I've worked on a research project where there was a three-legged doe that gave birth to twins 3 years in a row. She was that healthy. Having 3 legs was not impacting her in any way. So in some situations, you have to kind of realize that wildlife are survivors. And they, in a lot of ways, are going to do better. They're going to heal faster, and they're going to be less stressed if they're just left alone to heal on their own terms. Here's another kind of situation where it's commonly perceived that a wild animal might need assistance. This is a fledgling songbird. So if this was a video, you would see it hopping on the ground. You know, it might be able to fly a few feet, but not very well at all. But it's awake and it's alert. It might be making some noise, like little chirps. But usually there's no parents around. And it's pretty common for people to see this type of bird and think that it's been orphaned, it's fallen out of the nest, and it needs help. When in reality, the parents are off getting food for it, and it's learning how to fly. Young birds don't just hop out of the nest being expert flyers. You know, they kind of have to go through the training wheel phase by hopping on the ground and learning how their wings work and whatnot. And they are pretty vulnerable during that stage, but they have to go through that stage of their life in order to learn how to fly. So if you find a young bird that's hopping around on the ground and it doesn't seem to have any parents around, you're definitely going to want to leave it alone. This is not a situation where you need to intervene, and you can actually cause more harm than good by trying to assist the bird. Compare that to this situation where we have a young bird that, you know, has a lot of skin visible. The feathers haven't really come in yet. Its eyes are closed. It's not really able to stand up or walk around. This is a nestling, a much younger bird, and they only go through this phase for about maybe a week before they leave the nest, maybe 2 weeks. This bird would need to go back into the nest. If it fell out of the nest, it's probably not going to make it. But the best thing to do in a situation like this is to try to locate the nest. And if you do, just pop them right back in there. That is a win-win because the parents are going to be able to continue to take care of their young. If you're not sure what to do, a lot of these situations are very specific to the species. One of the best resources that you can have, aside from calling the Wildlife Helpline, is to go direct to the source, the professionals who work with these animals all the time, and they definitely know the right way to intervene. These are our licensed wildlife rehabilitators who are trained and licensed by the state of North Carolina to do wildlife rehabilitation. And you can see that web link that if you go to that, you'll be able to locate any licensed wildlife rehabilitator in North Carolina. Their licenses are species specific. So if you have, say, an injured goose, you're going to want to contact a waterfowl rehabilitator, because say a raptor rehabilitator is not going to have the licensing or the experience or potentially the equipment to be able to handle something like a goose. So when you go to that website, you'll see there are categories. So if you've got a baby bird that you need assistance with, you're going to go to a songbird rehabilitator. Just some notes about wildlife rehabilitators. They are not employed by the Wildlife Commission. They are independent and they get their licenses through the Wildlife Commission, but they basically don't get paid for any of this work. It's very pro bono. They do it out of the goodness of their heart. Some of them are funded by donations, or they're just not funded at all. So sometimes they have the capacity to come and visit the site and like pick up the animal, and sometimes they don't. So just keep that in mind and have appropriate expectations. They're going to do what's best for the wild animal, but sometimes their resources are a little bit limited. Okay, so, all right, moving on. Another tip, it's probably not orphaned. And touching will not cause the mom to abandon it, but human scents might attract predators. There's a really common old wives' tale out there that if you touch a baby animal, the mom's going to abandon it. That's actually not true. Wild animals do not abandon their young because of human scent. However, if you have lotion on your hand or your hands are just really human smelling for whatever reason, predators are often attracted to unique smells in the environment. So if you touch a baby animal, it's not going to cause the mom to abandon it, but you might be imparting your scent onto that animal, which could make it a target for a predator. So keep that in mind. It's still best not to touch wildlife, but don't take it back into your house and say, well, I touched it, so I have to take care of it because now it's been abandoned. That's really not what's going to happen. Okay, as an example, white-tailed deer fawns, for the first roughly 2 weeks of their lives, they spend all their time, almost all their time, completely alone. While the doe wanders off to go feed, the fawn will find some quiet space, hopefully sheltered in some brush or under some bushes to hide it. And it's just going to sit there by itself for hours and hours and hours. And the mom's only going to come and visit it a few times a day to feed it. But they're so weak and vulnerable that it's safer for them to hide than to follow along with mom. Sometimes they're good at hiding, sometimes they're not. But either way, if you find a lone fawn and it otherwise looks healthy, even if it doesn't run away from you and you can walk right up to it, chances are it's just fine and it does not need any type of intervention. You can certainly watch it from a distance to see if after several hours the doe does come back. But really, unless it's emaciated or has diarrhea or is covered in flies or something really obvious, it probably does not need any type of help from humans. Another really common example where this happens, where wild animals young are mistaken as abandoned or orphaned, rabbit nests. Same type of situation. Rabbit does, the females, only come and visit their nest maybe twice a day, just for a few minutes. They kind of hop in, they feed all their young, and then they go away again because they don't want to attract any predators to the nest. So if you find a rabbit nest and there's babies in there, but you can't see the mom, even after several hours, you haven't seen the adult rabbit come and visit, that doesn't mean the nest is abandoned. And the best thing you can do is just leave them alone. If you pull them out of the nest to look at them, just put them right back and contact a rehabilitator if you're worried about it. But usually the doe will come back, usually when there's nobody else around. Here's another situation. I took this picture myself, a little rabbit nest I found. They're so cute at that age. Okay, another tip. Never feed a wild animal, especially a baby wild animal, no matter what you read on the internet. Here are some examples of this. More damage is done when people try to assist a young animal by feeding it than good. On the left is a situation, it's a bone deformity called angel wings that is actually caused by malnutrition while a goose or other waterfowl are in a vulnerable state of growth when they're young, basically. And I got some noise distractions here. So This condition is caused by being fed improper foods. And geese and ducks eat vegetation. They eat grass, they eat duckweed and other stuff that grows in the water. They don't eat crackers and bread. Even, goose feed that you might get at the store is not proper food for them, and it can actually cause this condition, which will render them flightless for life. So even though you might have the best of intentions, you can be causing more harm than good. On the right is an example from one of our biggest, most established wildlife rehabilitators in North Carolina, an organization called Claws. And they have a flyer that they wrote: please do not feed the animals. We deal with animals that die because they've been fed. If you want to help, contact us first before you give them any food or water. So this is a really important thing to understand. Often the best thing you can do is not to intervene at all. And if you do intervene, do not automatically assume that the animal needs food or water. All right, and then to kind of lump all this together, really important rule of thumb: leave it alone until you know how to help. Contact a professional, get their opinion and advice before you try to intervene, because oftentimes you can easily do more harm than good. Okay, moving on to another type of human-wildlife interaction: sightings. The Wildlife Resources Commission actually is soliciting reports of sightings of a bunch of different species that we're trying to keep track of. Some of them are rare and we need to know about them. Some of them are spreading. They're becoming more common, like armadillos, who have been expanding their range from the west, and they're kind of showing up further and further east in North Carolina as the years goes on. Feral swine is an invasive species that causes incredible amounts of damage to the environment. As a matter of fact, please write down this website, ncferalswine.org. If you see a feral swine or any damage, please go to this website. There's a reporting form. Several state and federal agencies in North Carolina are trying to figure out what to do with these animals. So, by all means, that's a really great resource. Also, some other examples: new eagle's nests, mud puppies, hellbenders, spotted skunks. These are situations we definitely want to hear from you. Caves, that's more for bats. Our bat biologist is trying to learn where bats are, especially as they are impacted by a disease called white nose syndrome. So if you have a cave on your property, let us know. We'd love to go and inspect it for bats, and we'll show you all the cool stuff we find. All right, this is an interesting one here. I want you guys to take a second and try to figure out which of the photos are actual evidence of cougars or mountain lions. There's two names for the same animal. There's not a poll here, but I'm just going to give it away and say that these are all reported evidence in the last several years. So these are all recent sightings and evidence of cougars and mountain lions, and they are all of them cases of misidentification. So the one on the top left is a statue. The one on the bottom right is actually a bobcat. And if you don't believe me and you think that that's a long tail, here's an image showing just a couple seconds before with the animal moving forward. And you can actually see that stick that aligned perfectly with the tail to make it look like it was long. So it's actually just a bobcat. The one in the middle is just a domestic house cat. Top right are domestic dog footprints, and the bottom right is gray fox. So this all is just to kind of say that, honestly, the Wildlife Commission has been eager to take evidence from the public about cougar and mountain lion sightings for a long, long time. And every time we actually get any type of evidence submitted to us, it ends up not actually being a cougar. Sometimes we even get pictures that people send as jokes, and a quick reverse image search on the internet shows that the photo was actually taken in Canada or California or somewhere where there's known mountain lion populations. So this map actually shows where mountain lions have been sighted across the United States, and you can see the evidence of them in North Carolina just doesn't exist. Where there are established populations of cougars, there are roadkills, there's scat, there's photo images, on trail cams. There's lots of evidence, and we just don't see it. We actually haven't seen evidence of these animals for about 100 years. So if you do catch a sighting of something, especially if you have evidence that you think is a mountain lion, please send it to the commission. honestly, we'd be really excited if there was one, and it's not impossible. One day we might actually get one that wanders in from the west. But as of yet, we just don't see the evidence. So if you're worried about going outside and wandering around your property because you think a mountain lion might attack you, we just don't see them. And that's contrary to common myth, which is that, yes, they're there and nobody wants to admit it, but the evidence just is not there. Okay, we're going to move on to problem situations. Do a quick pop quiz. If you see a raccoon out during the day, what should you do? All right, we got chase it off, escape immediately and call animal control, shoot it, or watch and enjoy. I'll just give you a couple seconds to respond. All right, oh, this makes me happy. We've got 13% said chase it off, 15% said escape immediately and call animal control, 1% said shoot it, and 72% said watch and enjoy. The main point here is that nocturnal animals, including raccoons and foxes, which are not technically nocturnal, they're more awake during dawn and dusk, but that's not important. These animals have a lot of reasons to be awake during the daytime. Maybe they're hungry, maybe they've been disturbed from their resting place. They have just as many reasons to be awake and active during the daytime as human beings have excuses to be awake late at night. So just seeing a raccoon out during the daytime is not a reason to assume rabies, especially if it's getting into the trash. I mean, that would be a reason for me to go and be awake during the daytime if I was a raccoon. An interesting or important thing to know about rabies is that this is a neurological disease that causes rapid degeneration in health and behavior. So rabies causes things like seizures, it causes paralysis, it causes extremely docile behavior. So, and then death. I mean, rabies will kill an animal in a matter of days once the symptoms start to manifest. So, if you were able to walk up to a raccoon, right up to it, and it didn't even recognize that you were there in the first place, that is the raccoon I would be worried about, not the animal getting into the trash at noon. That's probably a healthy raccoon, just doing what raccoons do. All right, what causes conflict? I'm going to generalize here and talk about the big heavy hitters. The biggest one probably is going to be artificial food sources, especially artificial food sources close to homes or residences or businesses. These pictures show the top 3 heavy hitters of artificial food sources that cause conflict the most often. Bird feeders, really big attractant for bears. We've got trash, like garbage that's out and available and unsecured, also a huge attractant for bears, and then pet food that's left outside. These artificial food sources cause an incredible number of conflicts. And the great thing is that they're all preventable. So if you eliminate these unnatural food sources, you're probably not going to have these animals attracted up to your home in ways that you don't want. Again, with bears, bird feeders, and unsecured trash, the top causes of situations where a bear is spending too much time next to a home, and these are very easily preventable. For securing trash, it can be as simple as putting bungee cords over the lid to keep a raccoon or a possum from getting out. If you've got a problem with bears, you can actually easily just screw in a hinge and latch system and secure it with a carabiner, and that's going to keep pretty much anything out of there. So you really want to make sure that your trash is either inside a secure building or in a container that's wildlife proof. That's going to be a huge asset to prevent conflict. I want to talk about the bird feeder thing. I know this is a really unpopular thing to say, to recommend not putting out bird feeders. I mean, I am a bird enthusiast myself, but in my experience, bird feeders cause so much conflict that they're not worth it. They can also spread diseases like avian conjunctivitis and salmonellosis. So the best way to support birds is to actually provide natural food sources, native plants that bear seeds or berries, and also support the insects that feed birds. So that's really going to be your best bet if you really want to support the birds and attract them to your yard. So nix the bird feeders. Okay, so next, big cause of conflict, habituation. So here is a situation that, some of you might be looking at it and go, oh my goodness, that is so cool. This guy has obviously worked hard to sort of train this raccoon not to be afraid, and come so close that it's eating out of his hand. Some of you would love to be in this situation, but from my perspective, this is an animal that is very likely to actually end up dead because of this training behavior. So this individual is probably having an amazing time having this relationship with the raccoon, but you can imagine that same raccoon can go to the next property over and go up to the back porch of the neighbor expecting the same treatment. It's learned not to be afraid of humans. It's learned that people are a source of food, but the neighbor thinks this animal is not behaving normally. This raccoon probably has rabies, and the animal ends up getting shot or killed otherwise. So, it's not just about you and the experiences that you're having on your property. It's also how your neighbors are perceiving those wildlife interactions. So oftentimes it's much better and more humane to maintain that natural wariness that wildlife have of people. Here's another situation, coyote in a golf course. This is actually kind of common in some areas. Coyotes are very prevalent these days across the United States, and like pretty much all wild animals, they learn to identify a threat from a non-threat through direct experience. So if they can hang around people and they never have a bad experience from it, they have no reason to be afraid, and they learn from that. So just keep in mind that how you respond to a wildlife encounter can actually train that animal how it might behave the next time it sees a human. So kind of case in point, that natural fear that wildlife have of people is actually really healthy for them. It's a way that helps them avoid conflict with people. It makes them live happier, more natural lives. Habituated animals are easily mistaken as dangerous or sick, and are often killed for that behavior. And hazing, which is where instead of inviting the animal toward you, is actually scare it off, either by yelling or waving your hands really loud, or in a scary manner, or even throwing small objects toward the animal. It might feel mean, but in the long run, that is going to train the animal not to approach humans, which is always going to be better in the long run for it. Okay, what next? Lack of knowledge and about wildlife ID or behavior. Okay, so lack of knowledge often equals fear. If you don't know whether the situation is dangerous or not, it's human nature to assume the worst, and this causes a lot of conflict. So another pop quiz for you. If a snake has a triangular head, it's venomous. True or false? I'll give you a minute to answer that. This is a tough one. I'm curious to see. All right, 60% said true, 40% said false. All right, guys, this is going to really rock your world. So this snake in the picture is actually a harmless, non-venomous black rat snake. And here is the same exact species, a non-venomous, harmless corn snake, which are also native in North Carolina. One is in a relaxed posture and the other one feels threatened. Most snakes will flatten their heads when they feel threatened to make themselves look bigger. So there are an innumerable amount of harmless snakes that are killed every year because of this sort of myth that snakes with triangular heads are venomous. Most of the time, that's not true. The best way to know whether a snake is venomous is to know how to identify your venomous snakes. So real quick, I want you to look at these pictures and just try to figure out which one is a copperhead. I'm not going to do a poll on this one, but take a look at them, figure out which one is a copperhead. And I'm going to actually say that none of them are. This is an image of a copperhead. This is the most common venomous snake in North Carolina that you're going to come across. There are a lot of snakes that to the untrained eye are easily mistaken for copperheads. All the ones on the right of this picture are non-venomous and harmless. And the best way to understand if it's a copperhead or not is not by the shape of its, my little alarm that says I'm going on too long. Okay, best way to identify a copperhead It's going to have Hershey Kiss-like markings on the side of its body. So the darker part of its body, the darker pattern, is going to look like Hershey Kisses in a row. If you don't see that pattern, it's not going to be a copperhead. We've got 37 species of snakes in North Carolina. Only 6 of them are venomous. And the only one that you're really likely to come across is a copperhead. So know what they look like. When most snake bites occur, when people try to handle or kill a snake, they don't bite people for any other reason than self-defense. Snakes are not interested in envenomating people. They're not interested in biting us. You know, people reaching or grabbing maybe into ivy or into a log pile without looking first. These are how snake bites happen. For the most part, if a snake is given an opportunity to escape from a human being, that's exactly what they're going to do. So give them a minute, give them some space, and that's the best possible way that you can avoid a snake bite. I know I'm running really long, so I'm going to have to kind of cut a little bit of this short, but I did want to talk about coyotes because I know a lot of people registered and said they were interested in coyotes. There's a lot of fear about these animals. They're relatively new to North Carolina. They migrated in from the western part of the United States several decades ago. And at this point, there's probably not a square inch of North Carolina that does not have established coyotes on it. There's a lot of misunderstanding about these animals, a lot of fear about their danger to humans. This chart actually shows the recorded complaints that the Wildlife Commission receives about coyotes. The orange bars are complaints that don't involve any damage or harm that the coyotes caused. Most of those are fear-based. People are just afraid of coyotes. The red bars are cases where the coyote actually caused some type of damage. And you can see, if you look at it, outdoor cat injured or killed, poultry injured or killed, dog injured or killed. That's usually your small Yorkie type, you know, toy breed dogs. Most of the time, the biggest threat from a coyote is going to be to unsecured, unsupervised, vulnerable small animals. So, and then real quick, I wanted to give a little bit of context. In terms of danger to human beings, here's a study that showed that from 1970 to 2015, 367 reported coyote attacks on people were seen across the United States and Canada. So that's a huge area. And 2 of those attacks were fatal. But over that same time period, 4.5 million attacks were recorded from domestic dogs on people just in the United States. And in 1 year, in 2016, 31 of the dog attacks were fatal. So being afraid that coyotes are dangerous to people is kind of like being afraid of going outside because you think you're going to get struck by lightning. It's so incredibly rare that it's really not worth your time being afraid. If you see a coyote, the best thing you can do is just chase it off. They're afraid of people, and you can encourage them to be even more afraid of people by being scary at them. They're very receptive to that. They also can be hunted year-round if you're interested in that, but from about 100 years of intensive attempts to eradicate coyotes across the western United States, it pretty much showed that the more you kill them, the faster they reproduce. So it doesn't matter how much you try to trap or kill coyotes, you're not going to impact the population. So just that's something to keep in mind. And later I'm going to attach a recording of a workshop about coyotes if you want to learn more, because this is a huge topic. But for now, I'll just say, keep your small vulnerable pets or livestock supervised or in a secure, like chicken run if it's poultry, and that's going to be the best way to protect them from coyotes. I know I'm running over on time, so I'm going to skip some stuff and just talk just very, very quickly. Some of you guys actually said you were interested in beaver management. There's a state-run program, the North Carolina Beaver Management Assistance Program, that will help you if you live in certain counties. The county has to opt in to participate in that program, but you can actually get assistance with removing beavers or handling beaver damage. ncwildlife.org/beaver is going to be an amazing resource for you to learn about lethal and non-lethal ways of managing beaver issues. Deer can cause extensive damage to gardens, both vegetable and like floral gardens, and to new tree plantings. And the best way to handle that is through fencing. You can do like a traditional fence if it's a small area, but it needs to be 8 feet tall or taller. Deer are very good at jumping. If it's a larger area, you can do an electric fence or an offset fence where you've got 2 fences side by side. That can be really effective at keeping deer out. And you can protect individual trees from browsing activity. But again, I'm just going to share that website, ncwildlife.org/deer, as an excellent place to learn more. And then I think my last thing, I'm going to talk really quick about, what do you do if you actually have some type of damage from wildlife? You can certainly learn about species-specific issues by going to ncwildlife.org/have-a-problem or calling the Wildlife Helpline. But if you want somebody to come out to your property to help you with the situation, you're going to want to contact a wildlife control agent. That link down at the bottom is where you can find wildlife control agents that are licensed in your area. A lot like rehabilitators, they don't work for the Wildlife Commission. They're not paid by the commission. They have to be licensed through the Wildlife Commission. But they're a lot like hiring a pest control service to get rats or cockroaches out of your house. These are professionals who charge a fee for their service, but they're going to come and they're going to help you with the situation. So if you need somebody to come to your house or come to your property and remove wildlife or directly help you handle a wildlife problem situation, these are going to be the people you want to contact, but know that they don't do it for free. All right, and then I think that's it. I know I went over on time. I just want to leave that slide there for just a second with the contact information for the Wildlife Helpline. And if there's any time for questions, we can have them, but if not, somebody can take the screen from me.
All right, thank you, Falyn. Yes, that's a lot of information, great information there, a great presentation. A lot of resources out there. I think Laura put a lot of those links you had in the chat box so folks can revisit those links and check those things out. We really don't have much time for questions, but it looks like we just have 2. So we'll just take those real quick. So how do the mother deer and rabbits feed their babies?
Yeah, so they are both mammals, meaning that they feed their young milk. But unlike human babies, which need to be fed every hour or so, at short intervals, rabbits and deer only need to be fed at very rare intervals. So just once, twice, 3 times a day. And that is something that's an adaptation that allows those young animals to spend most of their time alone so that predators are not being attracted by the activity at the nest.
Okay, great. Thank you. And the last one, are pileated woodpecker sightings important enough to be reported?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Pileated woodpeckers are the largest species of woodpecker in North Carolina. They're often commonly mistaken as ivory-billed woodpeckers, which were similar looking, but they are now extinct. We haven't seen ivory-billed woodpeckers anywhere in the world for several decades. Pileated woodpeckers are actually doing really well. They're fairly common and have a stable population. So it's not something that we really need reports of, but if you want to call us excitedly about seeing one, we'd be happy to hear about that. But we're not keeping track of those sightings because there's a lot of pileated woodpeckers around and they are really neat.
Great. All right. Thank you so much, Falyn. If you have more questions for Falyn you'd like to ask, we will have an opportunity after our meeting is over at 2:30. We're going to just stay on the line for another 30 minutes and give folks an opportunity to interact more with Falyn and with Becky, who is our next presenter. All right. Well, we're going to try to get back on track and keep moving forward. So our next presentation will be from Becky Skiba, who was also with the North Carolina Wildlife Commission, who's going to talk with us today about wildlife identification. So Becky, the screen is yours.
Okay, thank you. I'm trying to make sure I'm sharing it appropriately. So let's see, does that look okay?
Yes, that looks great.
Okay, fantastic. So thanks everybody for joining us today. I know we're giving you a lot of information in a very short period of time. So feel free to, really go crazy in that question and answer box, and we'll definitely stay and answer what we can. But the very first thing I want to do is start off with a poll question relating to wildlife ID. Some of the skills, maybe some things that you're seeing on and around your property. So see if we can get that to pop up. And let's see, it looks like everybody's seen a combination of the above, but I'm going to take that to mean we had about 5% for scat and tracks. Some people have noticed some pathways or some movement. Actually only 1% or so has found some skull and some bones that are there on their property, which is really neat to kind of come across and figure out, piece together what's there. And then some markings or feeding. So awesome. But about 82% of you said you saw pretty much a combination of scats, tracks, markings, pathways. So that's pretty exciting. It's always nice to see wildlife while they're out there, but we don't always encounter them that way. So sometimes it's more beneficial to just scout an area for a while and see what happens. So let me get this going here. Sorry, I don't know why it's not moving. So one of the things that you might see when you're out and about, just kind of hiking through your property or looking for birds, or, out in your stand if you're a hunter, you might notice some scratch marks or claw marks that run pretty deep on the bark of trees. And so, there's only a couple of animals that can put a scratch mark quite this thick or large on this tree. And you'd be right if you were thinking that it would be black bears. So, typically this time of year, you will see some moms with her cubs. Granted, they're a bit older. These cubs here, this was taken 2 months ago, and they're probably maybe 10 months old. There's a mother that had 3, and they were having a good time climbing up and down the tree. Sometimes they do it for curiosity. They hear something or they smell something and they kind of want to move up and take a better look. It can also be for safety or security. So they're trying to get away from something that they perceive as being dangerous. So they climb up the tree to kind of to have a look around or to get out of view in general. But sometimes we have bears that if there's large enough cavities, they'll hang out up in those particular areas as well. So when you see marks like this and you haven't been using any heavy machinery, chances are you have black bears that are around. Another type of marking you might have noticed walking around are what we call rubs. So you may see them on several stands of trees like this, and down what seems like a pretty linear pathway, or it might be an entire area that looks like somebody just went to town on it, just rubbing the bark off. And you might also notice that the height that these markings are made are pretty consistent throughout. And so the culprit there is going to be a deer. So our white-tailed deer, they definitely leave a scent, and by marking these trees, kind of claiming this particular area. And you're gonna see, this is usually during the rut period where the males are after the females, which is also why it's really good hunting season in September, October, November. And so especially in October, they're really starting to rut. So you might see a little bit more of this. Sometimes you might see a little bit more near some creek beds or around some smaller water sources. But you're definitely going to be able to see these markings pretty clearly if you just kind of stand and just kind of let soft eyes go and look over the property in general. So this is good if you're a hunter and you're looking for places to set up a stand. It's also good if you just want to kind of see how wildlife is using your property, because, big components of that are going to be food and water and shelter, but, also space and a suitable arrangement. So if they're looking for a good mate and they're looking for places to bed down or den, some of these areas may show high traffic areas. So if you're interested in learning what's moving on your property and you have a trail camera at your disposal, whether you're a hunter or wildlife enthusiast, this can give you an idea of, hey, this would be a great spot for activity. Maybe you should set your trail camera up about knee height in this area and you might get some really great pictures or footage. So that's really fun to find. Another thing that you might notice are wildlife trails. And so these are areas, wildlife, they tend to try to, yes, they're cautious and they want to get to that water source or that food source as quickly as possible, but they also, they want to make sure that they feel protected. So a lot of times if a path is a little bit well worn as they're moving through, you may start to see some foliage that's separated or kind of like stomped down, but usually there's still pretty good cover around them. Or you might notice, as before, we might have markings for high traffic areas. We might also see some scat or droppings along this way. So, they can be creatures of habit. And if there's a direct source or path to a source that they need, then usually they're going to take that. So especially with deer, after they walk on things, things tend to stay trampled. So that's pretty easy to find. And then you may also notice, and even though it's just downed wood and logs, this can also be really, really helpful for you, because when we have dead wood and things like that, that's still creating habitat. So if this is elevated just enough where there's a gap underneath, that'd be perfect for like a little fox den. Possums like to get up underneath kind of fallen wood and stumps. And I know between, hurricane season and, just normal kind of wear and tear and degradation on a habitat or logging, anything that you can think of that would knock some of these down, it creates great habitat for wildlife. But it also brings insects and things like that into the fold as far as a very good protein-rich food source. And so that'll attract wildlife from birds pecking at it all the way through to anything like an omnivore that's going to come around and nibble. So this one looks like whoever's been at it has been making the most of this all-you-can-eat down log buffet. So they've done a pretty good job on that, and feeding is actually a really good way. Sometimes wildlife aren't so polite with the way that they're eating. In fact, sometimes they always like to take a to-go bag. So with the to-go bag here, we got a nice little picture of a coyote that's helping himself with a nice watermelon that with the sticker on it, I'm guessing he found somewhere near the trash. I'm not sure if we have anybody that grows watermelon, how quickly they put that on there. But sometimes they don't want to sit in situ and kind of eat. They want to take it with them to a place where they feel protected and where they have plenty of cover. So this was taken from a trail camera, so it's real easy to get this kind of shot to see what's moving, especially if you don't want to sit out, during the early evening, or late evening hours, or even the early morning when things are coming out to feed. But feeding is, we all do it, we all enjoy it, we schedule around it, and so do animals. So now the big thing about that is just figuring out your habitat and what might be eating. So like, for instance, this picture on the left here, it looks like we've had some shellfish on the menu, some bivalves here. And when you typically see bunches of bivalves that are cracked open, yes, for those of you on the coast, we've seen a seagull take a bivalve up and just drop it repeatedly to get it to crack and break open. But normally when you see a big cluster or big pile like this, and it's a little unusual, we're not seeing tracks in here, but that's usually the work of a raccoon. It likes to get in there and pick those apart. They love rib mussels, they'll go after oysters as well. So anything that they can sit there and eat and gobble up, and chances are you'll see a pathway where they've worked their way down to the, the lower area of the marsh or the waterway that they're accessing. We see sometimes we'll talk about otter and otter scat, but sometimes you'll see pathways up and down a bank or a little bit of an eroded bank. And that's a typical feeding spot or entrance and exit spot for a lot of wildlife as well. And then I'm sure the picture on the right is probably pretty familiar with a lot of people. So where we're used to seeing pine cones absolutely obliterated, most people don't realize that a pine cone has several seeds. So it's actually a very kind of compact nutrient source for a lot of animals, or herbivores anyway, or omnivores as well, with squirrels nibbling at them. And so they eat every single seed, and it's like a little energy packet for them that helps them, get through the day, through the month, whatever they're doing. So it's a great food source for them. So food scraps, or maybe a lack of food scraps, like, so for instance, if I just see like a giant pile of feathers somewhere, but I can't find the actual bird, that kind of is evidence that something happened here. I might have just missed it, but it'll also let you know what kind of food is available on your property. So, for those of you that are looking to create wildlife habitat, you can consider some plants or maybe some different crops or things that you don't mind having wildlife eat on. So especially things that will bloom or produce berries and fruit in the fall and the winter is something that's really excellent for helping our wildlife through the months where there's actually less available. So I know during the fall, acorns are a huge source. So keep those oak trees, and oaks support many, 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 many species, including moths. So they're really important food source. But then, things like pine cones and any, catkins, all these trees are providing pretty good food and sustenance for wildlife. But I think there's a second poll question that I'm going to go ahead and ask about. Yeah, a lot of people have just noticed them kind of about 36% happening around your property. 1% have seen them in your trash. That's good that it's a very low incidence of seeing them in your trash. Obviously, everybody's doing a really good job about setting their trash out just the night before or the morning of the pickup, and making sure that stuff is kind of contained away from wildlife. Eating crops, feeding other animals. So we've seen a combination of all of these, and congratulations to those that saw a couple of wild animals hosting a late night poker game. I won't get into it, but your lives must be very exciting. So that's pretty thrilling there. But wildlife observation is really best enjoyed when picking up on all the clues. So you feel like a little bit of a detective. You're always following in either the footsteps of wildlife or where they have been. And the more you start putting these clues together, the better you have an opportunity to see and observe this animal in the wild without hopefully being yourself observed. So, and like I said, in lieu of that, trail cameras really go a long way. Okay. And speaking of walking in the footsteps of animals, animal tracks is another thing that we tend to see when we're out and about. And it really depends, okay? So depending on your property, the elevation, the type of soil that you have, water sources, food sources that are there, you know, what kind of, I'm trying to think, you have like mostly pine straw and leaves and things like that, where it's really hard to see any tracks that are left, or large expanses of grasses, or do you have some areas that are a little bit sandier or more open that you can really investigate? And a lot of times people see animal tracks around their house, so they're checking up on us as well. So to look at animal tracks, we really need to take a closer look, because, you know, we're all used to seeing sneakers and things like that in the sand, or if we have dogs, we're used to seeing dog tracks all over the place. But some clues that we can pick up, for instance, there are what we call plantigrades, which are animals that walk on their heels or on their foot pads a little bit more, like this picture in the left. And so this animal, the way it's bearing its weight, it's not leaning up on its toes. It's walking kind of more full-footed, touching the earth as it's moving, right? And this animal, we can probably, you know, take a guess that it's got some pretty significant weight behind it because of the, you know, the indention there. It's pretty heavy. We have a few clues. So we have, you know, we got our toes, the number of toes that we're counting there. Do we see claws? Are they present? Are they absent? So those are some other things that are going to help us. General size of the track. So I know that not all of us go walking around and like, oh, let me go pull out this ruler that I have, or, you know, this measuring tape. But if you are out walking around and you have the ability to carry a measuring tape, it's always good, because you never know what you're going to encounter. And it's a great way for a size comparison, or a pen, or something that's pretty universal that you can lay down and show somebody when you show a picture later, so they have some sort of scale, right? And so I'll show you an example of that later. Another clue is we can tell what this animal on the left has been eating. Looks like they've been nibbling on some corn there, and they've been a little messy about it too. So this is an example on the left. This is a black bear's footprint here, okay? And then if we move over to the picture on the right, and oh, sorry, a black bear is a plantigrade, right? So he's pushing that heel and really focusing on that pad there. Whereas the picture on the right, and this may, for those of you that are dog owners, you may be like, oh, well, that's just a dog. This is actually coyote track here. So one thing we noticed right off the bat, you notice the shape is different. In these pictures, it's a little bit more difficult to compare size, because I haven't given you anything, you know, to really make sure that they're to scale. But we notice claws. So hopefully everybody can see those. And coyotes are what we call digigrades. So they walk on their toes. It's a little bit more pronounced. They're moving forward. And so, you know, sometimes when an animal is running or galloping, or, you know, just kind of, you know, doing a little bit fast, like joggers walk, they're going to lean a little bit, and they may drag the nails, or, you know, you may not have as clear of a track. So, you know, as an animal's walking and grazing and staying still. So those are just things to kind of look for when you're looking at tracks. And you may notice here, so we've got mud, we have sand. Those are some pretty clear tracks there. So, you know, it really helps too if you look at the weather. If you're really wanting to go out and spot different types of wildlife, and you say, hey, we just had a big rain, just think that's a nice open canvas for a lot of wildlife tracks that you're going to be able to see, because, you know, when the rain stopped, and if they've had all morning to go out and eat, or go get water, or hang out, or go interact with one another, you know, you're going to see evidence of it. Just like for those of my friends that are on the coast here with me, you know, first thing on the beach in the morning, it's a blank canvas. You get to read the story about every animal that's been walking the night before. You know, and there's for my folks in the mountains that just had snow, I know you just had a light dusting, but when you do get snow, I'm sure you're pretty experienced in seeing, you know, a lot of different animal tracks that are in that as well. So I'm not going to go we'll talk about different patterns, because sometimes, you know, if you have one track or a little bit of a track here, and then they start walking in tall grass or something like that, it can be really difficult to see, right? So, you know, you maybe get one print, but it may not tell enough of a story about what you're looking at. Oftentimes in animals, the hind foot and the front foot are going to be just slightly off in terms of size. One's going to be like the hind foot's usually a little larger than the front foot. But sometimes if you see the pattern that they make when they walk, that can tell you a little bit more about the body structure, right? And how it moves, how it makes a living. So like with humans, we walk, we're, diagonal walkers. We walk straight ahead because that's the way our hips are set up, 1 foot at a time. But if we had to walk on all fours, after we stopped laughing at each other, we'd realize that, we have a certain kind of a gait, a pattern that we move in. And so we've basically broken it down to 4 different types. And when you see the little circles, that's indicative of the front foot, and then the larger one of the back foot there. So pacers, basically, if you look at this pattern, it's where the hind foot, as the animal's walking, that hind foot is going to pass their front foot as they step forward. So think in your head of how bears walk, or beavers, or Virginia opossums, if you ever see possums walking, okay? Diagonal walkers is something that everybody is pretty familiar with. Some examples of these would be deer, elk, coyote. So dogs and cats are diagonal walkers, and that'd be maybe, a little bit more how we would walk as well, foxes. So when we have diagonal walkers, as you see there, the light one is actually the front foot, and then the darker one in this picture is the back foot. But there are what we call different kinds of registers. So there is a direct register, and that basically just means that the front foot, as they lift the front foot, the rear foot on that same side drops directly into the front track. So cats and foxes, right, walk this way. This is also known as perfect walking. Okay, and then there's also an indirect register, which basically means that the front foot, as they pick that up, the rear foot on that side drops slightly behind and to the right or the left of the track. So for my folks in the mountains, you may think of elk, or anywhere else in the Piedmont, anywhere, coyotes do that. So they're, the rear foot is slightly behind the front foot. So that's how that pattern is going to look. And don't worry, I have resources that we're going to send out and things that we're going to attach for you if you want to read a little bit more in depth and get a little bit more of a visual on it. We also have bounders, and this one is basically where they place their front feet down, and in one motion they leap forward, they lift up their front feet, and they put their rear feet just behind where their front feet previously landed, making this kind of pattern up here. And so, their tracks, they appear as like 2 paws that fall side by side. So an example of that would include otters and weasels. So they are pretty obvious when you do see those in different mediums, just because, like I said, you have the front feet that are aligned with the rear feet. And then we have gallopers. This is what squirrels and rabbits and rodents do. So gallopers, they place their rear feet slightly ahead of the front feet, and then they push off so that their front feet land first and their back feet land in front. So if you've ever played leapfrog, that's essentially what squirrels and rabbits and rodents do as a galloper. They're playing leapfrog. So let's go ahead and do our 3rd poll question before we get into some of the ideas or details of our tracks. So if you had to observe tracks, clear tracks, what would be some of the best mediums? All right, so it looks like polls in, 14% snow. Yep, concrete. Yeah, no, so concrete, it depends on if the animal stepped in something and has left something on there. The only example I can remember where concrete was reliable was we had raccoons that kept getting into oysters. And so they'd eat on the oysters, and then that the buildup from the oyster shells, as they walk back, it looked like chalk markings back and forth across the asphalt because they kept taking the same path over and over again each low tide. Sand is also very good, and it also depends if the wind's blowing a lot, if that's going to move things, right? So sometimes with the wind, just knock the tracks right off or blow the plants around. Loose dirt, so yeah, it depends on the weight of the animal and how they're moving, but loose dirt. Mud is excellent. As you saw, it almost fossilizes it. Mulch, yeah, so mulch is not impressionable at all. And a combination of the above. So yeah, there's absolutely no answer that's 100%. It really depends on the environmental conditions, except we both know that, like I said, concrete and mulch would be really tough as a medium to find those animal tracks. So go where you expect them to be and you'll be more in luck. So right here, here's an example of snow as a perfect medium. Okay, and just to give you an idea, of the animal this is. Well, first let's do a little investigative work here. So hopefully in this picture you can clearly see a front track and a rear track, and it looks like they're side by side. So it may actually make it look larger, or almost looks like somebody put on, like, you know, the feet from Sully and Monster Zeke and walked around. But the shape of this, we've got kind of this narrow heel, the wider toes that are up here that are spread out, but we can see distinct toes. Here's another example of it in mud, and it looks like somebody's walked clean over the path too. So, you know, we have some larger tracks, which are going to be your rear tracks, and then your front tracks in mud, but you can still see some activity happen here. And a nice little close up here. And I'll just go ahead and tell you, you may be able to see a little bit of webbing on that rear foot. And so this is actually a nutria track. We do have nutria in North Carolina, and they look so much like beavers and muskrats that one of the best ways to tell them apart from beavers and muskrat on your property is going to be by their tracks. And so, you know, they are different from those left by beavers and muskrats because their prints show only 4 toes on the front feet, which is that smaller one to the left there. So, and then also you're going to look, there's like a partial webbing between the toes on the rear foot. And that tells you it's a nutria if there's partial webbing on the rear foot, because muskrats don't have webbing on their feet, where beaver feet are fully webbed. So you'll notice the measuring, you know, tape under here, and that's just a really good way, again, to try to show people maybe the width of a track. Another thing that's helpful is if you can actually show the length of a track too, because then you can narrow down what animal you think that is. Okay, and here's an example of a track. We got the front. So this is a pacer, okay, which means that they move one side of their body and then the other side as they walk. And I can tell that from where the front and the rear footprints are falling. And in this track, I can clearly make out some smaller feet, but I noticed that the back feet look fully webbed. And so that really helps me figure out that we're not looking at a muskrat, we're looking at a beaver here, okay? And so for a better close-up look at what that is, so you'll see the full, you know, we've got the 5 toes on the front track, and then fully webbed on the rear for that beaver. Another important thing is again the size. So the front feet are about 2.5 to 3 inches long, and the back feet, you know, they're about 4.5 to 7 inches long. So, you know, that's where it really comes into play to have, if you have measuring tape or something for scale. If you don't, use your hand, and then you can always measure your hand when you get home. That shouldn't change much. I don't care how cold it is outside when you get back. But here's an example of black bears. And so, you know, they have 5 toes on each foot, sharp, curved claws. So remember, they tend to put their weight on the backs of their paws, but sometimes if they're walking in a really soft medium, you can pick up on some of those claws there if they're putting them out. So, you know, they use them to climb trees and feed on insects and any grubs that are in decaying logs. And they're also pacers. So, you know, their hind foot passes in front of their front foot as they step forward. So the hind foot is going to be larger, and the front foot is going to be almost 2 inches smaller. So, you know, hopefully you can track that and then see where they went, and then make sure that not only are you observing the tracks, but if you do see tracks, keep your head up and look around at what's immediately around you as well. So if I see bear tracks, this is great and it's worth taking a picture for, but that means there are bears present in the area. So I definitely need to have eyes and ears up and around and have some situational awareness while I'm looking at this. I tend to be really excited about one thing, but I will tell you, if you see bear tracks, that's fantastic. But just like I said, be really aware of your surroundings at that time. This one's a very odd track, but I did see some notice some interest in this species. This is also a pacer. Again, you can tell by the way it walks here, but it looks like we have kind of a weird appendage there. In fact, if you look at a better kind of picture of that, it looks like they have an opposable thumb there. Nice, some nails you might get to see there. And so this is a possum. So each foot has 5 digits, and you know, the first digit on the hind foot, all but the first digit on the hind foot has claws. You'll notice that it looks almost like a human hand on that one, and where maybe the thumb is hyperflexed there, hyperextended. So some people liken possum tracks to primate tracks. I mean, I could kind of see that. So if you see that in and around your property, possums are pretty much anywhere. They're generalists in what they eat and where they are. So I'm not shocked by that at all. The next pattern we're going to talk about is bounders. And an example of this are otters. So river otters, this is kind of the pattern. So we got the front feet, the rear feet, front feet, rear feet, kind of catching up that way. And, you know, there's a difference in size, but it's not by much. Or I'm sorry, on the otter, there's a definite difference. But when we get into something like coyotes, they have a track that's more oval shaped and longer than it is wide. So that's one way to kind of look at that and other dogs. Their feet are smaller and narrower than an average dog, even though they have similar body size. And these are an example of our diagonal walkers. So that coyote paw print, you know, you're going to be able to see it pretty easily in the mud and anything you can find, like sometimes in grassier areas, you'll see little divots or impressions where the grass is part, and you'll be able to see coyote tracks as well. But they have those, the nails, they're sharper than the domestic dog. So you can kind of look for the sharp tip point there. Let's see, we have fox footprints, and I'm just going to go back for a second. Look at the spacing of the toes of the coyote. See how they're a little bit more spaced out from the actual foot pad. And then if you look at the fox's toes here, they're a little bit clustered together, especially those two middle toes are almost kind of pinched together. So definitely 4 visible toe pads with the claw there. And each of the toes, we have a wider imprint from the toe pads, and the heel may not be as easily defined there. Now, some people are really good, right? And they want to know the difference between a gray fox and a red fox. So that was a little trickier. If you really want to get out your measuring tape, that's a good way to find out. But for me, as long as I know it's a fox, I'm pretty content with that. And then I'm happy to go put out a trail camera later. But there is a little bit of a difference there, you know, between the actual sizes of the paw prints. Our red foxes are larger than our gray foxes. And then something that you might see on your property, hopefully you do see, these tracks, they almost look flower-like to me, like very delicate, and they are a little bit more rounded out. So the toe pads aren't necessarily oblong. These are bobcat tracks, okay? So go with that first instinct when you see it outside. So a really good rule of thumb or way to differentiate bobcat tracks from coyote tracks is if it's a bobcat track, or if it's a track and I can draw a circle around it and that seems to encapsulate that track the easiest, that's a cat family. So that's bobcat for you. All right. Say I've got another track, like my coyote track. The only shape, I couldn't draw a circle around it and include the foot pad, but if I draw an egg shape or an oval, that's usually a good way to tell the difference between a cat track or a cat family track or a dog family track there. So sometimes that helps me out if I'm in the field and I'm just like, you know, oh, well, it'd be great if they were side by side, but they didn't do it that way, right? So you got to do a little sleuthing on your own there. So just remember too, with cat prints, like the bobcat, there's no visible nail imprint there, okay? Because cats can retract their claws, whereas coyotes and foxes cannot. So that's another thing that's really a good clue in differentiating between the two of them there. Another great thing that you might see around, or you might see around after stepping in it, hopefully not, would be animal scat. And so when I say scat, I'm not talking about animals that love jazz. I'm talking about, you know, what they leave behind, the clues that they give us to work with. And what's really cool about scat, besides, you know, the obvious just, you know, curiosity that we seem to have for them, is that there's so many details to glean from here. One, we can figure out, you know, how the animals are getting along on your property. What are they eating, right? So what is their feeding? What are they hitting the most? So like, for instance, raccoons can have scat that varies from having a ton of berries in it, you know, to eating a lot of insects or, you know, seeds and things like that. So we'll see evidence of all of that in their scat, and that changes by season. It also depends on the diet of the animal as to what you're going to see in that scat. And as some of us probably know, your scat, or the consistency, or, you know, how easily things move along, and how well you absorb nutrients, all that's going to be dependent on age as well. So no, you can't look at a pile of scat and go, whew, man, that was an old coyote there. But, you know, you may be able to see some evidence that maybe they haven't processed enough of the nutrients in there. So, you know, you notice in the picture on the left, we have a nice pen there, and tubular scat is kind of more indicative of the dog family. Raccoons will also have this, skunks, bears, okay? On the right, I have bobcat scat. So you may notice for the cat family, we've got more of that teardrop or that tapered edge there. You know, if it's oblong, I think most of us are used to seeing deer scat. If it looks like little M&Ms that are rounded out, you know, rabbits. So just depending on the size of the scat, that's going to be a big indicator as well. But I think we've got another poll question that is scat related here. Just in terms of if you were to actually come up to or approach or see scat that you didn't recognize, what should you do? So if you see scat and you don't recognize it, what should you do? All right, it looks like the results are in. So most people, the first thing you want to do is take a picture so you can share it with somebody and ask questions later. And absolutely, you definitely should. But again, just to help you identify and avoid that frustrating process, take a picture with an object to reference it for size. Don't touch the scat and notice where it is, because we'll talk about it in just a second, but the location of the scat is going to be really telling for you as well. So 95% of you nailed that one. Nobody thought it was a lucky day, and some people did check the bottom of their shoes. So that's good to know. It's all, I don't know. That's usually the second thing I do is, did I already step in that? But scat tells us more than just what the animal is eating. It can tell us a lot about behavior too. So for instance, with a river otter, I bet, and just go ahead and tell you right now before you get all excited, nobody Google anal jelly. That's not going to be a good Google search for you. That's a whole nother topic. They use the anal jelly from otters in Europe. They'll actually use it to sequence individual DNA of otters. So that is all you need to know about that. There's nothing good that's going to come from Googling that. But a singular otter scat is called a spraint, like you sprained your ankle kind of thing. And so typically when we see otter scat, we know it because we see, kind of crustaceans or ground up, fish bones and scales and things like that. So otters, the other reason that they have that anal jelly is to actually help protect their intestines. There's an extra lining in there so that all of these bones and scales and, fins and things like that don't tear up their inner linings. So that's kind of an adaptation for them. So if you see a single scat, an otter's got an urge, he's got to go, and he's moving along doing otter things. But there are places that otters have that they call latrines. So these are places where all otters will kind of gather and use the restroom, and it's a big social hub, like, hey, how's it going? What's happening with you? Hey, did you try that new seafood over at, Mary Beth's farm? Fantastic, right? But also something else that they do at those hubs is they're able to tell who's an estrus, right? So that helps with the mating too. So, these are good areas. If you start to notice a buildup of scat or particular areas that seem very popular over others, maybe there's more shelter over in that area or it's close to a water source, that might be a great place to put a trail camera so you can see some really good behavior there. Some other scat that you might notice by looking at what they eat. So again, that diet. So in here, we've got a lot of fiber. This is a beaver. So this is beaver scat here. You might notice too, herbivores, when they use the restroom, their scat tends to be more rounded. Think rabbits, right? So we've got more rounded out scat, and that's just the way that they're processing everything and pooping it out essentially there. And then with the beaver diet here, obviously we're going to see a lot of that woody kind of material that's in there. But when we look at something else, to say, yeah, we've been talking a lot about mammals, but what if I see a pile like this in hand? And no, that's not my hand, and no, that's not how I would ever encourage you to handle any scat. It's just a really good picture there. So, most of the times when we see bird scat, it's on our cars, right? Or, just fell on your friend's head, or, we notice it in places that we're used to seeing it because it's usually this kind of like milky white, just right. And we don't notice it being in solid form. But I noticed there was some interest in turkeys. And so for our turkey hunters or enthusiasts that are out there, scat is also really fascinating because it can tell us the gender of, the birds that are out there. So, we have, because of the way the insides of a female turkey are, when she uses the restroom, it comes out in this beautiful little, kind of mound or soft serve form here. And then when male turkeys use the restroom, the way that their sphincter and everything's set up, it comes out in the shape of a J. So a good way to remember that are J for Jakes for the male turkeys there. So J for Jakes, and then otherwise, if it's a dollop there, a very neatly placed dollop, it's a female turkey. So, it's always good to pay attention to this stuff. If you're a turkey hunter, this is going to help you track, for turkey, which turkey you want to set up your decoys for, or set up in an area in particular use. If you think that, there's a lot of female turkeys over there and where a few jakes are hiding, that's going to help you with your tracking. Or it's going to show you what's really popular as far as where are they hanging out? Where are they roosting? Where are they feeding? So that's something new.
Becky, hey, Becky.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. We're kind of running out of time, so maybe if you could just draw some conclusions for a few minutes. We'll give you a couple minutes.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. I was trying to watch the clock as I go, but I kind of lost track there. But the last thing I'll say about scat is think about the size relative to the animal, right? So sphincters, big deal, right? So you see this pile of corn here, and then over here, this is bear scat. This is definitely bear scat. This is not a raccoon that had a really awful day, right? So the last thing I'll talk about really briefly is dentition. And if you see skulls or anything like that on your property, some of the things to look at would be the shape of the skull, the size. And when we talk about dental formula, look inside at the types of teeth. And I've added a lot of resources on this. So we look at molars and premolars, canines and incisors. And so each tooth is designated for a different purpose there. So some are for biting and really cutting things up. Some are more for tearing and piercing flesh, or, crushing and grinding and slicing. So those are all really helpful. A dental formula that you can look up online. I think I've got some resources for you as well. The way it'll read is like whatever's on the upper jaw, this many of this canines, this many of this canines on the left, this many of this on the right, separated by this dash here. And then the same thing on the lower half. So that's one thing you can use to kind of figure out what you're looking at. So for instance, just for a quick example, and then I'll draw a conclusion. This is a river otter here. So if we were looking at incisors, which are these teeth in the very front row, you start from the middle and you go 3 to the left, 3 to the right. We've got 1 canine on either side. So, those are just some easy ways to tell. Another thing, if you find skulls in the yard, so we have our gray fox and our red fox. The red fox is Vulpes is the scientific name. And what's cool is that they have temporal lines on the head of on the actual top of the skeleton. And for a red fox, it'll make a V shape. But if you find one that has this horseshoe shape, like on the left, that's our gray fox. And notice the slight difference in size, but that'll be very helpful as well. And so your carnivores are going to have, definitely more canines and incisors and premolars. Your omnivores are going to have more of your molars and premolars, because they're going to need that to tear things up. And then we have creatures like beavers who really don't have a use for canines because, they're not chasing down plants. So, molars for grinding. And why we care about this, and this is just the final conclusion, in black bears, one other thing we can take a step further is by taking this premolar here, we can actually tell the age of the black bear. So it's like reading tree lines here, or tree rings. But in addition to that, if it's a female that we took the tooth from, we can tell what year she's had cubs, because her growth lines, or her rings of annuli, are actually smaller or closer together in those years, because she had very little growth, but she was actually nursing cubs. So, that's really helpful for us knowing in terms of how the population is doing. And then that's all I have on that. Sorry I ran over time. You could talk so long about all this stuff. But, I don't know if we have time for questions or anything like that, but.
So great. Thank you so much, Becky. Definitely a lot of information there. I think Becky said she had a lot of resources that she wanted to send out. So over the next week, look for an email from Forest Her with some of those resources in there. And there's some websites and things that I believe Laura has put in the chat as well. So Becky, we don't actually have any questions right now. So you did an awesome job explaining some of those things. And I'm sure folks are looking for those extra resources to be able to judge some of those tracks and some of the teeth marks for sure. So great. Thank you so much, Becky. Just a reminder, we're going to stay on here for a few more minutes to talk. So if you have a few more questions you would like to ask, feel free to stay on and put those questions in the question and answer box. We'd love to kind of talk with you and share some more information. Real quick, this was our last meeting of this Managing for Wildlife workshop. And I'm going to try to steal the screen here and move forward. Okay. One thing we always do here at Forest Her is we try to give away a free little Forest Her mug. And so we'd love to do that. So Joanne Cox, Dottie Ferguson, congratulations. The two of y'all are new owners of a Forest Her travel mug. So we will get that information out there to you as soon as possible. Some things to think about. We do have some more virtual workshops coming up in the new year. So yay for the year 2021. I think a lot of folks are looking to get rid of 2020. So we do have some exciting things coming your way in January. So our first meeting will be in January 14th on trail cameras and nature photography. So just ways to learn to get out and enjoy your woods a little more. So if that interests you, we hope that you will join us during that time. You can see some of the upcoming dates in February, March, and throughout the rest of the year into June. So we hope to see you there. One more thing, always looking to connect with us. We'd love to connect with you. Feel free, join our Facebook group. We would love to hear information from you, share your stories. If you have questions, great opportunity to interact with other folks. We are really, at Forest Her, we are really trying to create a community of women and get people interacting and talking with each other. So check that out. If you are not a social media person, totally understandable. So shoot us an email. We can definitely share your email if you'd like. We will definitely answer your email. So we've got folks looking after that. And our website is coming. We're working really hard on getting that. It's just a lot of information for us. So we are working on that as well. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us today and taking a few minutes out of your day to be with us and learn a little bit more about wildlife. We hope the information has been great for you. Once again, as you leave here, it'll direct you to an evaluation. We would love to hear from you. We use that information to improve our programs. We want to know what's great, what you liked, what you didn't like. That helps us to make sure that we are providing what you want to hear. What do you want to know more about? How can we better help you make those management decisions on your property? So please take a few minutes. We'd love to see that. Otherwise, if you have more questions, just stay tuned, type them in the question and answer box, and we will get to them. If you're leaving us, thank you so much. Happy holidays to everyone out there. Stay safe and get outside and enjoy the outdoors. Thank you so much. All right, so it looks like we do have a few questions. So let's see, Becky or Falyn, whichever one of you would like to take this. We have a question on how do you set up trail cams?
If you go to we can look it up real quick, but the Museum of North Carolina's website, there's a program called Candid Critters that was there, and they have a lot of great instructions on how they set up their trail cameras. What I really like to do, first of all, practice with it in the yard if you can. Make sure you know how to set it up, how to do the walk test on it, so you can make sure that it's actually, taking pictures where you want it to take pictures and actually at the distance that you want to observe, so that if your trail camera is set close enough or not. Like sometimes the detection distance can be influenced by other trees and stuff in the way, or if there's a road close by, it'll pick up a bunch of cars coming through. So if you set it up knee height, and that gets most mammals, small to medium and large size mammals on there. And then another thing, if you see a wildlife trail, you may want to set it up that way. You don't want to set it up facing the east or the west, because I think most people tell you to try to set it more in a northerly direction. And that's so you don't get that kind of sunlight exposure that trips it all day long. And another thing to look up and play with beforehand are your settings on the actual camera itself as to how many times you want it to take pictures, like how often, and if you want it to take pictures or videos. And honestly, these SD cards nowadays, they hold so much data. If I were you, I'd just go for broke and set it on the, take as many pictures as you want, and as many pictures, like it'll take one every minute, every 5 minutes, or it'll take one every, however, and just, go for broke and set it up out there. And then you can always go back out there and check it, see what you get. If you want a little bit of extra fun, you can always go to like Walmart or some other places and either buy like the doe estrus in a can or fox urine or something. Be careful, don't let that stuff spill, and don't leave it in the car. But you can spray just a little bit, maybe a little bit away from your trail camera, and you might get something sniffing around or a little bit of interest in it. Don't go crazy on it. Nobody wants to think there's a red fox out there with a prostrate problem or anything. So you just want to do little bits, because then wildlife will be like, oh, something's wrong. That's not right, but that might also help. But really just, if you just put it knee height, and also behind it, just make sure that the camera is not angled where it's shooting down or up. And so that's a little bit of trial and error. You can usually take sticks or things like that you can put behind it to kind of level it out. And I'll let Falyn take it from there.
Okay, great.
Oh, did you have anything to add? Sorry, it says you would like to answer this question.
Oh, well, Becky was answering it, so we're good. She did an
Oh,
excellent
okay.
job.
Sorry, it just popped up on the thing. But yeah, but I'll find that real quick for you, Jim, and I'll put it in the type and answer slot for you, or in the chat box for you, so you can find that website.
Awesome. And Becky was saying the Candid Critters website, and Laurel has put that in the chat box as well. So check that out to get that website. Thanks, Becky. The next question we have looks more like a Falyn question. So what snakes are most commonly confused with copperheads? There was one on the slide in the first presentation on the bottom right that looked very similar.
It's an excellent question. And honestly, I would say that most snakes in North Carolina have at some point been mistaken for copperheads, just because I think there's so much awareness that copperheads are common and venomous, and so little awareness about the other snake species that we have, that I've seen snakes that look absolutely nothing whatsoever at all like copperheads, being mistaken for copperheads. But I can actually share the screen of that particular slide and tell you what those were pictures of, if I can find it. So bear with me for just a second here. Where's my snake slide? There we go. So I'm going to, I gotta get my computer arranged appropriately to show that off. And share screen. We're gonna do, okay, there we go. So the one on the top right is actually a DeKay's brown snake, which is a very small snake that only maxes out at maybe 2 feet long, really commonly called a baby copperhead. They're completely harmless. They're one of the safest snakes to handle, actually, because they're so docile, and they mostly eat like slugs and earthworms. They're actually really awesome to have if you keep a garden, because they'll keep the slugs at bay. The one in the middle is a juvenile black rat snake. The juveniles look totally different than the adults. The adults are kind of black all over, maybe with a white chin, but the juveniles have like this really interesting black and gray pattern on them. Again, harmless. They're great tree climbers, so you might see them in trees, but yeah, they're not venomous. And then the one on the bottom is actually a northern water snake, one of the species, probably the species that is most easily confused as a copperhead, even for people who know what copperheads look like, because they kind of have that triangular pattern on their bodies, but it's the inverse. So a copperhead has the Hershey kisses on the body, where it's the darker part of the pattern that is the line of Hershey kisses. And you'll see on the water snake, it's the inverse of that. So the Hershey kisses are actually the lighter color with the darker color in the background. So that's going to be another harmless, non-venomous species. So if you just get a really good idea of what copperheads look like, I mean, you're 90% of the way there to not getting bitten by one.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Okay. Becky, if you want to answer this one, and then maybe Falyn, if you got some comments you can add. So any comments about having bear on your property? I'm excited that what we see on our camera. So what are the do's and don'ts?
Well, as my mother-in-law learned, you should definitely make sure that if you're, say, up in a deer stand or anything like that, make sure you're secure and make sure your door is closed tight. Really, it depends on what you're doing. If you're using your land for hunting and you have a food source that's down there, like a corn pile or anything like that, you're going to see them more readily in those areas. And I would just say, make sure that you're at your best advantage when it comes to what you can see and what you can hear. Normally bears aren't aggressive, and as long as you're not between a mother and her cubs, you shouldn't have too much of a problem. The hazing techniques that Falyn brought up, like just making yourself look bigger, being really loud, so that if they see you coming, they can be still or go the other way. Yeah, just like Falyn was doing just there. That's actually bears imitating humans. So, just really, you shouldn't have a negative encounter. Just be observant of where they are. And in low light situations, I would bring a really bright flashlight. And, if you could do something where you're not alone. So say if you're walking with your, someone else, or if you're out in a UTV or something that makes noise, that's helpful. Keep your dogs on leashes, because sometimes they catch the scent of a bear and they run out and they start chasing them, and that could turn into a conflict, and nobody wants to have, their beloved dog injured by a bear because there was just this moment of tension that happened. But I mean, really just enjoy it. I mean, the more you get to see them and observe them from a distance. If you see one, I wouldn't continue walking towards it. I would just kind of stand where I was and hang out for a bit and see what it did. But normally, I say normally, but like I said, as long as you're not between a mother and their cubs, it's not anything you should really be too concerned about. I wouldn't throw food at it or trying to bring it closer for a photo or anything like that. I would just be still. I would, see how the bear reacts to me. Oftentimes they'll run off or run up into a tree, but like, Falyn was demonstrating, just be big and, make a lot of noise if you are at some point uncomfortable that the interaction's gone on too long. I don't know if, and bearwise.org is a great resource that tells a lot about that, but I would be a little more cautious, like I said, if you do use your property for hunting, and if you do know there's like a corn pile or something like that they're getting used to coming to, But I don't know if Falyn has anything she wants to add to it, or I mean, I know you typed it in Bearwise, but
yeah, I think just excellent advice. General rule of thumb is if you see a bear, don't get any closer to it. Back away. If it's like on your back porch, like looking in your window, that would be something where you'd probably want to haze it, open up a window and bang some pots and pans to scare it away. But if you're out on a walk on your property and it's in an area where it's kind of expected for bears to be, just kind of back off. They will bluff charge if they feel threatened, which is where they like run a couple steps and then pound their front feet into the ground and make this like really scary popping or grunting sound. That does not mean that they're about to attack. It's just basically their way of saying, you're in my bubble and I feel threatened, so please back off, give me some space. And if a bear ever does that to you, back off.
Good advice, ladies. Great. All right, one more question here. We've got from Billy Joe. I think I missed your question earlier. I thought we might have feral hogs eating our squash and watermelons. What are the best signs that there might be hogs around?
I can answer that question. I am on the North Carolina Feral Swine Task Force, which is a partnership of multiple state and federal agencies that are trying to do something about the feral swine problem in North Carolina. And I actually have a presentation that I gave recently. I'm trying to find it so I can give you a sample of what a really good indicator of feral swine damage looks like. And there we go. If I'm still sharing my screen, there you go. This is kind of a poor quality photo, but feral swine eat by rooting in soft soil. They can definitely just grab anything off the top of the ground, but if you see damage to vegetables or any kind of crops, plus you also see this digging into the soil, that's going to be a sure sign that it's probably feral swine. That rooting or rooting into the ground is really the best indicator, and they can cover a lot of area and cause a lot of that damage very quickly, like overnight. And I think there was a question that I accidentally marked as answered earlier. So I apologize, but I want to go ahead and answer it because I promised I would. It was from, let me scroll down and find it. It was Ann Howard. Are there poisonous snakes that don't have a triangular head? The answer is yes, although technically the snakes that we have in North Carolina are not poisonous. Poisonous means that if you eat it, you'll get poisoned. Venomous means that if it bites you, you'll get poisoned. So we have venomous snakes in North Carolina. There are species of snakes that are actually poisonous, but they don't live anywhere around here. So the venomous coral snake, which is rare, it's like semi-aquatic and it's found primarily on the coast. You're probably never going to come across one, but they have like a very smooth head. They're not triangular at all. Again, a general rule of thumb, don't go by head shape, don't go by pupil shape, know your venomous snakes. And herpsofnc.org is really the best place to learn your snake ID. Thank you.
Awesome, ladies. Definitely a lot of information there. A lot of websites, Bearwise, herps.org as well. So maybe we can get that in the chat. It looks like we don't have any more questions. If there's anybody out there that had a burning question you'd like to ask Falyn or Becky, or anyone else that is part of the Forester group of panelists that are on here joining us today, or Laurel Case from NC State, we're more than happy to answer it. Okay, how about this one? What was the venomous snake link, Falyn, that you had just mentioned? The herps?
It is herpsofnc.org. Herps are basically the category of animals that includes reptiles and amphibians. So herpsofnc.org. And if I can find the chat bubble, I'll put it in the chat, but I don't.
Okay, I think Laurel just did.
Laurel just put it
for you. Great.
That's for all of the reptiles and amphibians in North Carolina. So it's a great resource to learn your turtle ID or your salamander ID as well. But if you do like /snakes, then that'll get you straight to the snake page. And it has them separated out based on venomous and then non-venomous. And you can quickly see that we don't have very many venomous species, and they're pretty easy to identify if you take the time to learn them.
Well, and I do want to add to that too, that even though we only have 6 venomous species, there's really only 3 that homeowners are probably going to more regularly encounter, which would be our cottonmouth, also known as a water moccasin, the copperhead, and then in some areas like forested areas, probably the timber rattlesnake, probably be the 3 most common. I mean, most of our, other ones are either just in habitats like, that are mostly in military ranges or other areas where we have lots of unfragmented habitat for a lot of these snakes. And as she mentioned, you can go your whole life without seeing the coral snake. So, but if you just learn 3 to avoid, then you'll be very confident that any other one that you see is going to be an okay snake or a safe snake.
That's right. Snakes are really cool. They're awesome animals, and they're definitely valuable to have around. So don't just kill them just because you don't like snakes. I just want to quickly say a little bit more about snakes. So copperheads are actually the least venomous snake that we have in North Carolina. So they have this propensity of dry biting. Again, they'll only bite for self-defense. So if you leave them alone, they're not going to bite you. But if you do get bitten by one, chances are pretty good that they're not going to inject any venom at all. That's really common with copperheads. That said, you can't just look at it and tell whether they injected venom. So always seek medical assistance if you get bitten by a snake and you don't know what it is or it's venomous. But the likelihood is you're probably not even going to need antivenom. And even if you do, even if you were envenomated, the copperhead venom is not very dangerous. So, usually it's not going to be the same as getting bitten by a much more dangerous snake. Like you don't want to get bitten by a rattlesnake. But rattlesnakes are pretty scared of people. They don't like being anywhere near us. So you're not likely to see a rattlesnake near your home. If anything, you're more likely to see a rattlesnake sunning on a hiking path up in the mountains where people don't go very often. So be more wary of rattlesnakes in areas where there are not a lot of people. Whereas copperheads don't care. They live everywhere in North Carolina, even in suburbs. I live in Raleigh, and I had a copperhead in my backyard a few weeks ago. And I just kind of, honestly, I took a long broom handle and sort of poked it and got it to slither up onto the outside of my fence. And it was fine. I left it there. I didn't try to relocate it or kill it. And I haven't seen it in my yard since. So really, the copperheads aren't as bad as, there's more fear about copperheads than the actual danger that they pose. That's all I'm going to say about snakes, unless somebody asks.
Falyn, it looks like somebody is asking about cougars around Snow Camp, and that doesn't sound like a bar that's open on Thursday nights to me. So I'm guessing they're talking about the eastern cougars. seeing any sign of those around.
Yeah, when it comes to people saying that they've seen cougars, it's pretty pervasive. It's pretty common for people to basically hear all their lives that there are cougars around and even convince themselves that they've seen one. One of our biologists has this really, I think, telling story about driving, I think it was early in the morning one day, and saw a mountain lion like across the road right in front of his car. And, he like was really shocked and surprised because we don't have any evidence of mountain lions. So he immediately slammed on his brakes, and the cat actually stopped on the side of the road and looked back at him. And he said in that split second that he actually got a better look at that cat that he swore had a long tail, huge body. It miraculously turned into a bobcat. There are a lot of people who, like, eyewitness testimonies of big cats, black panthers and cougars in North Carolina. It's pretty common, but the evidence just doesn't actually show itself. And all of the submitted evidence that we have received, like I said, showed cases of mistaken identity. I've seen Rottweilers called black panthers. I've seen bears called black panthers. I've seen every type of house cat under the sun called cougars. And the telling part there is that out west, where they definitely have cougars, they get hit by cars. There's roadkill of cougars. There's tons of trail cams out there these days. And so the idea of cougars being out there, but we can't get any evidence of them being out there. There's no hair, there's no scat, there's no carcasses, no bones, no photos. I think that tells the story in and of itself. Like I said, it's not impossible that we might get one at some time in the future from that comes into North Carolina from the west. But I would not trust people saying that, yes, they know there are cougars out there. Even if they say, I've seen one, the evidence just isn't there. And, take that for what it's worth. But as a biologist, you can't necessarily trust eyewitness testimony because, as you know from like crime statistics, people's memory is not as exact as we'd like to think it is. It is what it is. So there you go.
All right, so yeah, we really don't have any more questions. Definitely some comments from folks about, a cat getting bitten by a copperhead, return to normal quickly, small animals. Another mistaken identity. It looks like somebody mistook a miniature black cow that had escaped as a bear. So obviously lots of mistakes in identity there occur every day. Well, ladies, it looks like we don't really have any more questions. If there's anybody out there that has a burning question, now's the time to ask. Falyn and Becky are full of answers. They got a lot of information to share. So feel free to chime in. Got just a few more minutes. If we don't really get any more questions, then all right, looks like we've got one. What about wild dog interactions? So, Falyn, would you like to take that one? Do you see a lot of wild dog interactions, or what to know about that?
Yeah, so actually it's not something that I tend to bring up in presentations, but it's a really good thing to talk about. So coyotes are relatively new on the scene in North Carolina, and before coyotes arrived in North Carolina, all of the canid related complaints really came from feral dogs. There's a lot of them out there. I think, as a matter of fact, several decades ago, the Wildlife Commission had to get involved with trying to help local governments reduce feral dog populations because it was so much of a problem. Feral dogs attacking livestock, feral dogs attacking other people's pets. There's a lot of places in North Carolina that don't have leash laws, and unspayed and neutered dogs will breed, and they can live just fine without a human caretaker. Now that we have coyotes, coyotes certainly are on the scene, and we know that they do take outdoor cats and they do cause some issues, but feral dogs are still out there. As a matter of fact, the way that coyotes and feral dogs go after prey is different. So if you know enough about it, you can actually tell just by looking at a carcass whether it was attacked by a feral dog or a coyote. Usually the biggest indicator is that feral dogs, a lot of times they kill for fun, but they don't necessarily eat their quarry, kind of like outdoor cats. Outdoor cats don't prey on native wildlife because they're hungry. They do it because it's an instinct. They do it because they just have to do it, whether they're hungry or not. And feral dogs will do the same thing. So if you see, like you have livestock that is mysteriously died of something, and but it's not eaten, and it's still laying where it died, and it's just kind of macerated, like chewed up, bitten a little bit, scratches and things like that, but it wasn't obviously eaten. It was probably a domestic dog that did that, because they kill for fun, for what it's worth. Whereas a coyote or another predator is going to eat it. They kill it because they're hungry. Coyotes tend to take their prey away. So if you have chickens that just completely disappear, it's probably going to be either a coyote or maybe a fox. They'll take their prey somewhere safe and they'll eat it far away from where they killed it. Dogs will just leave their prey wherever they died.
Great. All right. So, Falyn or Becky, any cool tricks you got up your sleeve to keep skunks away?
I can take that too, unless Becky wants to jump in. Yeah, skunks are an interesting one because they have a very effective means of self-defense. They're actually very cat-like, interestingly enough. And if you own cats, you know that cats are really averse to getting sprayed with water. So that motion detecting sprinkler that I showed in my presentation is actually super effective at keeping skunks away from a particular part of your yard. A thing that can attract skunks is grubs in the yard. If you have a lawn that has grubs, skunks are mostly insectivorous. They eat bugs and they love grubs. So if you see a whole bunch of little conical holes in your yard, it could be a skunk that's hanging around and it's getting to the grubs. So if it's a situation like that where it's coming around for the grubs, then treating the lawn for the grubs will get rid of the attraction that's bringing the skunks in. Skunks also love to get up underneath houses. So again, if you have like an opening underneath the house, try to block it off with a hardware cloth or some sort of lattice, something that's going to keep wildlife from getting under there.
Okay, how about, thanks for that, Falyn. We've got one more and we've got, looks like a minute left before 3. So any comments about moles or voles? So I'm guessing maybe to keep them away, or maybe what to do so they're not as encouraged to be in your yard, maybe?
I'll take this one too. Moles and voles are kind of interesting because they're small. You can't really fence them out. The difference between the two is that moles eat, let me make sure I don't mix this up. Moles eat insects, voles eat plant roots. So you can tell which one you have by what's being damaged. If you got your garden vegetables or garden plants getting damaged, it's probably voles. And then if, say if you've got a grub issue, then that's going to be moles. Again, if it's moles and they're going after grubs, treat your yard for grubs. They even have insecticide or pesticide-ridden little fake grubs that you can sort of plant in the mole tunnels, and basically it's one of the only approved forms of poison for any type of wildlife in North Carolina, that like mole pesticide. And I can't give you any brand names, but there's certain ones that are approved. If you want to know more, put that in the chat and I'll try to look up the information. Trapping is really a good way to keep them from your yard if you have a really bad problem. You can get little traps specific that go into the tunnels, and they'll actually trap them, just kind of like putting mouse traps in your house. So they're kind of difficult. I hate answering that question because there's no like silver bullet for dealing with them. But then again, if you have coyotes, coyotes love to eat moles and voles. Foxes love to eat moles and voles. So if you have a really good functioning ecosystem on your property, you're probably going to have the predators that are going to help keep the mole and vole populations in check.
Great, yes. Voles can definitely be a problem in young planted fields too, where someone might be trying to establish some trees. So we get a lot of damage from that as well. All right, looks like we got one more question. So this will be the last question we take because it is 3:02, so we're running a little behind. So along the same lines, what are your recommendations for groundhogs in pastures? What would you suggest about trying to get rid of them or encouraging to leave the area?
Groundhogs are another one of the ones that I just, my dog is chasing her tail, by the way, if you can hear her. Hi, are you having fun? So the thing about groundhogs is that once they're established in a burrow, basically if they feel threatened, they're just going to go deep into their burrow and hide until the threat goes away. So it's pretty much impossible to like relocate a groundhog, which is actually illegal in North Carolina anyway. And it's hard to just incentivize them to leave. So honestly, usually the most effective way to get rid of groundhogs is to reduce the population by either shooting if you are in an area where it's safe to discharge a firearm, or even trapping. So that's an option. There's a trapping season where you can set traps. You don't need a trapping permit if you're on your own property. But if it's outside of the trapping season, you do have to get something called a depredation permit. If you call the Wildlife Helpline, they can help you figure out the route to getting a depredation permit. It's a free permit that basically allows somebody to set a trap for wildlife outside of the trapping season. So make sure that you won't get in trouble for setting a trap outside of the season. Again, it's free. The animal has to be causing some kind of damage, but if the groundhogs dig a whole bunch of holes in your pasture, especially if you have like horses and you're worried about them breaking legs, that definitely counts as damage. So it's pretty easy to get a depredation permit for them. I see a comment about poison. I guess Becky made a comment, poison does work its way up the trophic system. That's absolutely correct. I really even hate to mention that there is an approved poison for moles because the second you put poison out, you're also poisoning any animal that come in contact with the carcass that eats it. So, like birds of prey are really susceptible to, say, rat poison. In almost all cases in North Carolina, it is illegal to set out poison for wildlife. It's different if it's inside your home or inside a building. That's called structural pesticides, but there's very specific rules on how you can do that. But if it's outside and anything can come in contact with it, in general, poisoning is not going to be a legal option. Really, the mole thing, the mole poison is really the only situation I can think of where it can be legal. And even then, there's only specific poisons that are approved. And there's specific ways that you have to put the poison out to make sure nothing else gets a hold of them. Poison's not a good idea.
All right, awesome, ladies. You two did a great job. Lots of comments on fascinating information. Great job. Thanks for the information. It's 3:05, so we will pretty much end this call. So those of you that are left still out there joining us, thanks for sticking with us. The questions are great. We loved having you. And we look forward to seeing you again in January.